You ever clocked in anywhere before?
No.
Have you ever had a real job?
No.
Okay.
What are wells for?
Hold on, we're a little short. We just have it.
No, you can't just have it. It's not a soup kitchen.
Wait.
My earring's gone!
Are you
Oh my god, I'm gonna cry! What's wrong with you guys? My diamond earring came up in the ocean and it's gone. And there's people that are dying.
What does that mean, soup kitchen?
While it clearly didn't start with Paris Hilton, the rise of the celebutante, a person famous primarily for being the child of someone wealthy and famous, came inescapably to my attention at that point. As shows like Keeping Up with the Kardashians and other like-minded reality shows were disgorged into the airwaves, I routinely found myself wondering why the hell I even knew any of these people's names, let alone was supposed to give a single shit about anything they said or did. As near as I could tell, none of these people had any particular talent or skill, aside, one supposes, from a gift for self-promotion. None of them were especially interesting, and while it may be a side effect of editing, most of them came across as vapid and or stupid. Certainly, they didn't seem like people you'd put in charge of your kid, or your dog, or your country. Yet here we are. Star of the reality show The Apprentice, Donald J. Trump is President of the United States. This boastful, narcissistic, talentless buffoon is the leader of the free, for now, world. Instead of simply being the punchline in a Bloom County or Doonesbury cartoon strip, this man is now responsible for making life or death decisions for nearly 320 million people in the U.S., not to mention the rest of the world, who remain poised to see if a Twitter outburst will result in nuclear extinction. At least with W, who was no mental giant himself, he was surrounded by people who, while still vicious and heartless, were not inherently stupid. W's inner circle were at least experienced in politics. They may not have followed the rules, but at least they knew them. Trump, on the other hand, well, his senior advisor is Jared Kushner, a 36-year-old real estate developer who looks like he should be hassling the Goonies about how his dad's going to foreclose on all of their houses. His ability to get into university seems tied primarily to his father's donations to those universities, a father, we might add, who was convicted of tax evasion, illegal campaign donations, and witness tampering. And Kushner seems mostly famous for spending $1.8 billion of other people's money to buy a building. Well, and for marrying Ivanka Trump. Ivanka herself should be of little more consequence to America than a Kardashian. A pretty person born into money whose primary business seems, like her father's, to be putting her name on expensive retail items. She has no official position in the White House, but seems to have access to everything that a senior advisor to the president would have, and given Melania Trump's absence, seems to be serving as First Lady. Eric and Donald Jr. are presently responsible for running Trump's businesses while he's president. The two of them are described as, quote, American businessmen and former reality personalities, end quote. And they look like they should be hassling the Tri-Lambs at Adams College. Eric at least manages to fundraise for St. Jude's Children's Hospital through golfing events, which seem primarily hosted at his father's courses. Well, hell, even when he's doing something good, it still seems tainted by serving as a promotional and profit tool for his father. For fuck's sake. Aside from Trump himself, who can't avoid getting in front of a camera or a microphone, whose ridiculous, blustering personality is at least good for a joke or two, whether he's hawking pizza for Pizza Hut, or shaving Vince McMahon's head at WrestleMania, or fooling around with Rudy Giuliani in drag, or singing the theme song from Green Acres? Whatever. I shouldn't even know who these people are. They should be no more significant to me or to our country than any other wealthy white people in New York with no talent, skill, or responsibilities. They shouldn't be worth the time or effort it took to write this broadside. Instead, Kushner has been given a newly created position in the White House Office of American Innovation, which is supposed to use business as a model for running government, while he's also, quote, driving foreign and domestic policy as well as decisions on presidential personnel, end quote. and serving as Trump's lead advisor on relations with China, Mexico, Canada, and the Middle East. Some of that sounds a lot like that's supposed to be the president's job. Did you elect Kushner president? 'Cause I sure didn't. Nor did I vote for Ivanka to run her operations out of the White House using White House resources. Or for the Trump sons to continue running his businesses and using the leverage of Trump's presidency to increase personal wealth. I didn't vote for any of it, because I didn't want to turn the office of the presidency into a goddamn reality show. Aside from the fact that it's a terrible way to operate a diplomatic and leadership office, reality shows thrive on conflict. No one watches them to see someone shuffle papers all fucking day, or sit in countless meetings about bureaucratic fine-tuning, or negotiating trade deals over wheat. They watch to see shit explode. They watch to see who's going to bitch slap who's cheating on what, and what kind of trendy accessory they're supposed to wear now. And that's what America voted for. Well, some of it. Well, not really even a majority of voters, I guess. Regardless, part of me wants to just throw my hands up in the fucking air and walk away. To just dismiss the American people as a bunch of brainless rubes who can't be trusted with the good china. To just surrender and watch TV, play video games, and just fuck off until the inevitable end of this once proud nation. But then I remember. The majority of people who voted against Trump. I remember writing a broadside about the largest fucking protest ever the day after Trump's inauguration. I remember that Trump, and essentially his entire administration, is under investigation for colluding with the fucking Russians to circumvent our election and our fucking sovereignty. And I remember that the elections are coming. Not just in 2018, but something like half a dozen special elections this year. And those things keep this show going. They keep me going. They keep me from just giving up. Because those elections represent the most important thing to remember when dealing with shitty reality shows. You can change the fucking channel.
The sleep of reason brings forth monsters.
I'm a whiner and I keep whining and whining until I win.
Maybe somebody will rise up.
We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty.
Welcome to Swing State, an aggressive, progressive, critical, and political podcast from the middle of the Midwest. Welcome back to Swing State. This is episode 14, and if there's any justice in the world, by the time you hear this, Devin Nunez doesn't have a job. If you've been listening at all to this show, you've heard us mention Russia once or twice. Well, we're going to mention it again, because we awoke this morning to find the breaking news that Trump, quote, administration sought to block Sally Yates from testifying to Congress, end quote. For fuck's sake, can Trump possibly look more like someone covering shit up?
When we got here this morning, we had expected to start off immediately talking about Devin Nunez and his midnight ride to the White House. But in this scandalous cloud that Donald Trump is immersed in, we can't seem to get through a single day without some new piece of information making a terrible situation look even worse. And just to give you a little taste of that article that Luane referenced the title of a moment ago, the Trump administration sought to block former acting Attorney General Sally Yates from testifying to Congress in the House investigation of links between Russian officials and Donald Trump's presidential campaign, the Washington Post has learned, a position that is likely to further anger Democrats who have accused Republicans of trying to damage the inquiry. Yeah, no shit. That's my addition there. That's not in the Washington Post.
No, although they may have wanted to say that.
According to letters the Post reviewed, the Justice Department notified Yates earlier this month that the administration considers a great deal of her possible testimony to be barred from discussion in a congressional hearing because the topics are covered by the presidential communication privilege.
Bullshit.
I think that's probably good enough. You get the idea. So we have now further evidence that there is a cover-up going on, and we're not alone in saying this. I think it's Bernstein of Woodward and Bernstein is on NBC, also saying that there is a cover-up that has been in process, and to him, he thinks it's plain as day and obvious.
Well, Adam Schiff, Democrat, California, you've probably heard about him a lot lately. He's the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, and he's literally asked Nunez to recuse himself from the probe because I think it goes beyond just looking inappropriate for Nunez to be behaving the way he's behaving. I think they probably have some suspicion.
Yeah, well, between John McCain calling for a special committee, which is that would be my preference. I mean, remember we had a select committee on Benghazi headed by anyone know Devin Nunez.
Oh wait, one of the multitude of hearings with regard to Benghazi.
Yeah, and just to pause in the breaking news section here, why the fuck don't we have a special committee? I'm sorry, am I crazy? I could have swore to God that a foreign adversary deliberately hacked into American citizens' computer networks to steal information and then disseminate it to make sure that the outcome of the election was favorable to them. That alone, regardless of whether any American citizen had anything to do with it, regardless of whether Donald Trump has anything to do with it or not, in the end, we absolutely should have a bipartisan special committee that is independent of Congress, independent of the White, independent of everybody, to find out the truth.
Well, the independent is probably the most important part because it's very clear that the poisonous connection to Russia, it's spread deep through the Trump administration. None of these people can be involved with anything regarding this investigation except sitting their ass in the box and speaking into the microphone about their communications with Russia.
And that includes people like the Attorney General. That includes Jared Kushner.
For those of you who haven't already heard, Jared Kushner is basically the President of the United States.
Might as well be.
He's apparently supposed to be the head of a new White House office, which is the White House Office of American Innovation. The purpose of it is to take cues from business as to how to run the government, and I think anybody who knows anything about either business or government can tell you those are very different things.
Yeah, those are not synonymous. Every time somebody says that, we should run the government like a business. So you mean you have to actually make a profit?
Right.
So then what happens if you're involved in a world war? Right. And you need to literally start rationing things across like we had to in World War II. We had to ration all sorts of stuff just to make enough bullets and tanks and planes to fight the war. Not to mention, war is not a money-making enterprise. Well,
but it is for the people who are supplying the guns and shit.
Sure, but it's usually not for the country, particularly if your country is the one being bombarded. But anyway, That's neither here nor there.
At risk of diverging a lot, one of the problems with the whole running the government like a business is they don't actually mean that. Because we, the American citizens, are the investors and the fucking board of directors. If this is a corporation, they are legally obligated to make as much fucking money as possible for their investors. Okay? If that's the case, that's us. And I don't need my government to make as much fucking money as possible. I need my government to function.
I don't recall any point in the Constitution that outlines that as the responsibility of the government. I don't recall anything in the Declaration of Independence where that seemed to be the goal of the revolution. I don't remember any prominent figure speaking to that effect at any point in our history. So
yeah, profit was never the idea. American liberty was the idea. A structured environment in which people were free to be as free as possible within the sort of confines of what you need for a government to function.
And we'll just skip the whole part about the early American slave state.
Yeah. Well, speaking of running government like a business.
Yeah, right. So to
anyway,
kind of
sorry.
No, it's fine. So to get us back on track, the other thing that I think we have to talk about at some length is the Devin Nunez situation. And we looked this up. It is Nunez, not Nunez, which is how we want to pronounce it because in America we're pretty familiar with Spanish language names. But it is Devin Nunez as far as I can tell. Devin Nunez is a Republican from California. He is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, which is currently being tasked with investigating, along with the FBI and along with the Senate Intelligence Committee, the Russian meddling in the election and any potential links between American citizens, particularly of the Trump campaign, to the Russian government or any of their agents. And instead of doing that, I am reading about Devin Nunez kind of taking midnight rides to the White House to view intelligence for some reason over there instead of in his own congressional skiff, which they have. That's a special place you can go view classified information. Here's another article from the Washington Post. It's titled, Nunez admits meeting with sources of Trump surveillance documents on White House grounds. People who are long-time Washington observers, they don't know what the fuck to make of this. Why is he going there? Why is he doing this? We'll come to that in a minute. The chairman of the House Intelligence Committee acknowledged Monday that he had made a secret visit to the White House last week to view intelligence files he then cited as proof of potentially improper spying activity against President Trump, casting a new doubt on the independence of a congressional investigation into Russian election interference. The admission by Representative Devin Nunez of California triggered calls among Democrats for his removal as chairman of the House panel and bipartisan appeals for an independent probe of the Kremlin meddling in the 2016 election and potential connections between Russia and Trump associates. This is absolutely bizarre. And one thing that we have to be crystal friggin' clear about up front is this is not the only bullshit Devin Nunez has or is, as of this recording, pulling. The committee was supposed to have a hearing, an open hearing, at which Sally Yates, James Clapper, and one other person was going to testify. I apologize, I can't recall the name off the top of my head. But it was going to be a pretty major day in news because we were going to have Sally Yates, who of course was the one that came to Donald Trump with the news that General Flynn was open to blackmail by Russians because of his deceptive snake-like behavior. She was then promptly fired, and we haven't heard anything from her or General Flynn, for that matter, which is very odd, since. So what is Nunez doing? Is he chairing the investigative committee? Is he digging through all the facts? Is he trying to get to the bottom of this? No, he is riding to the White House in the middle of the night to look at information, to confer with them, apparently, about what he's finding. His House Intelligence Committee colleagues have still not seen the intelligence he claims to have seen at the White House. They still haven't seen it. He is canceling, or moving back, meetings, including the one with Sally Yates and James Clapper. He appears to be stonewalling and trying to subvert the investigation he is the chairman of.
Well, that's actually it. He appears to be doing that. I'm not really clear what other way you could interpret what he's doing. I mean, right. He can sort of play, because I think he mentions in here, well, there's a better security, but whatever. At this point, appearances really do matter, and all of this is the appearance of somebody covering shit up. Lindsey Graham, Republican, South Carolina, has referred to this behavior as, quote, not good. It's not a confidence builder. End quote.
Was he the one that also called him Inspector Clouseau?
He didn't say that, but he did say, quote, we're rapidly getting, end quote, to the point where a select committee or independent commission is needed to conduct the investigation into Russian meddling.
I'll repeat the point. I don't understand how that's even a question, considering we're talking about a foreign adversary attacking the American election. It is unconscionable to me that there's any person in that town who doesn't believe that an independent, full, thorough investigation must take place without any of this smoke and bullshit. He knows that what he's doing looks terrible. He has to know that. And the fact that he's apparently switching cars to kind of leave his staff behind when he goes to the White House. Guys, this is out of a spy movie.
That's the type of shit you do when you're trying to dodge surveillance.
Yeah, and not very well because it's in the paper the same day.
That's actually the thing about this. It has all the earmarks of what you describe as a spy novel, except it's a spy novel about idiots.
It's a Coen Brothers movie, in other words. It's
yes,
it's burn after reading.
It's a Coen Brothers movie, except that the guy at the top has his fucking fingers on nuclear buttons. That's the problem. Yeah, it's funny as fuck when it's a Coen Brothers movie, but this isn't a Coen movie. This is the fucking idiots running our government right now. And right now, they're running it more or less unopposed.
The thing that I don't want to do is drip too far into cynicism, because I don't, as of this moment, I have no reason to think that the Senate Intelligence Committee is in any way as compromised as the House one is. I still believe a special committee is absolutely necessary. I don't know why we're waiting for one. I don't know why it hasn't been done already. I'm mad that it hasn't been done already. But I don't think that John McCain and Lindsey Graham and Democrats and even Republicans in the Senate, I don't think that they're just going to stand by and try and stonewall as well, because remember, Donald Trump doesn't have any friends, except for Devin Nunez, apparently, who is trying to do everything he can to... I don't even know what he was trying to do.
I don't know either, because his behavior, first of all, it goes well beyond covering for your buddy, but second of all, we're talking about covering for your buddy doing possibly treasonous shit.
And if you're the chairman of a committee that's supposed to be investigating this, and you're canceling meetings or moving them back, you're not sharing the intelligence that you're getting. You're talking about it apparently with White House staffers, but you're not discussing it with your intelligence committee colleagues. To me, this looks like an obstruction of justice. And if Nunez is caught up in this, as he may well be.
If you take this out of presidential context and you just look at this as a criminal investigation, the cops are looking at alleged crimes perpetrated by, I don't know, a mob boss. And the lead investigator isn't conferring with his tactical team, but is conferring with the suspect. If you take it out of the context of Republican, Democrat, presidential, whatever, committee, this, whatever, that, if you just make it cops and robbers, the cop is talking to the robber and not to the other cops.
And it's actually, it's even worse than Wayne describes because of the balance of powers that we have between the three branches of government and the position specifically that Nunez holds. Now, just to give you a little bit of history, the Select Permanent Committee on Intelligence, which is what he's the chairman of, this was established to exactly avoid this kind of thing, to avoid partisanship in investigations when it comes to national security and intelligence matters. Devin Nunez never has to move his ass out of his chair to get any information that he wants. As far as this investigation goes, he is God Almighty. If he wants information, if he wants somebody to come and talk to him, he says come, and that is it. If he wants classified information brought to him, he orders a certified courier to carry that across town. You do not go down to the White House to ask them for it. You demand it of the White House because you're the Congress. Technically, you're supposed to be the most powerful of the three branches. I mean, they're balanced, but the Congress is really the one that's supposed to represent the people more than the others.
If this were literally any other case, if this were, I would think, literally any other president, even a bonehead like W would know that appearances matter with this type of shit.
Of course it does. Of course they matter in government and legal matters.
And you look at somebody like Nunez and say, dude, you have to step down. You have to recuse yourself. There's too much suspicion been thrown on you at this point. You have to step out of the way, just for appearance's fucking sake, if nothing else.
The appearance of corruption, when it comes to matters like this, is as bad as actual corruption. You cannot even appear to be helping or somehow trying to assist or delay or stall for the benefit of your party. You just can't, because once you start going down that road, this is how democracy started eroding a little bit at it, one little peg at a time. People stop trusting in the institutions. Suddenly we don't think the House Intelligence Committee is worth anything because it's just another partisan witch hunt, which, by the way, the Republicans have already so damaged their reputation with the Benghazi and the email, the endless investigations and nonsense. This needs to stop. We need a special committee with actual credibility, some standing that people can know is going to get to the truth. Not what we want to be the truth, but the actual truth. And that includes Democrats who would love to see Dumbo impeached, as well as Republicans who would like him to reign for 1,000 years. We just need the truth.
Well, yes, we need the truth. And part of the problem we're dealing with here is that Trump has gone out of his way, even before he was elected, to do as much as possible to delegitimize every authority that could do anything to him. The most obvious, of course, is the fake news and all of that stuff with the press. You know, that you can't listen to any source except the ones that he deems acceptable. But he's also gone out of his way at this point to delegitimize everybody outside of his circle. He's gone out of his way to really not even work with Congress in any way. When it came to health care, he basically gave up even trying to do anything.
Well, I think it was 17 days that this lasted. They took 17 days to try and ram through one of the biggest legislative coups in modern times. They took all of about 2 weeks to try and do it, and then Trump took his ball and went home.
Yeah, he gave a deadline and they weren't going to do it because for once they sort of showed a little spine and went, whoa, just a second here. Well, and I know members of the House with regard to health care were like, no, we're not just going to ram this through because it's going to go up to Senate. They're going to completely change it, and then they're basically going to tell us what they said.
Oh, and you want to talk about delegitimizing. I mean, I know we're a little off the path here, but this is important because Donald Trump, during the process of the healthcare negotiation, because, right, he's a super negotiating, deal-making genius, right? It's almost like a superpower. I think Donald Trump, he's said, I'm maybe one of the smartest people ever.
I'm speaking with myself, number one, because I have a very good brain and I've said a lot of things. So I know what I'm doing.
Trust me, I'm like a smart person. I'm smart.
Because of my genius, okay?
Putting in context, they never talked to Democrats. They never went and asked for their support. They never asked for their input. They didn't want them. They were going to do this on their own. They decided that we, the Republican Party, are going to do this on their own. Donald Trump, in that process, threatens the Freedom Caucus members if they don't vote for the bill and other Republicans who were backing away. They called his bluff. He said, fuck, man, what are you going to do? He just gave an ultimatum and collapsed. Isn't this the same thing as like the Barack Obama red line in Syria? You know, what is a threat worth from Donald Trump?
Well, what it also shows you is, I think, what we already figured out, which is all of his accomplishments, in quotes, that he's succeeded at thus far have almost exclusively been by executive order. He hasn't had to even do the work of being a president. He just signs shit and gets a picture again of himself with this smug look in his little leather folder, and then he moves on. When it comes to doing the actual work of being the president and actually having to work with Congress, he gives up because it's too hard.
And we are not even 100 days yet into the administration, but he has not one major accomplishment in the entire time. And on a parallel track with that, his approval rating just dipped down to 36%.
Jesus Christ.
So, which is lower than it ever was for just about any president. Well, Obama never got that low. Reagan did, Clinton did, but it was temporary, or it took them a while and they bounced back. Donald Trump, no one has ever gotten this low this fast and accomplished this little in this amount of time. It's amazing. You win majorities in the Senate and House, and you win the executive, and you can't pass anything. Not a thing. Your health care law, you spend 2 weeks and then quit.
One of the things that sort of gives me hope comes from a quote by Matt Olson. Now, Olson, he was in the Obama administration. He was the head of national counterterrorism, and he also was a counsel for the National Security Agency. He's quoted as saying, with regard to the Russian, all this whole thing with Nunez and his behavior, quote, "The only explanation you're left with is that this is all being orchestrated by the White House," end quote. Now, why does that give me hope? Because, as we've discussed multiple times during this show, Donald Trump doesn't know what the fuck he's doing.
Exactly.
And if he's in charge, he's going to fuck this up. And he's not listening to anybody who would be able to tell him anything useful. So at the end of the day, this is all going to have to come out, because at the very least, Trump can't keep his fucking mouth shut.
That's my reason for optimism, is that if indeed all of this has happened, things that are being alleged, Donald Trump is far too stupid to get away with it. He's far too arrogant. Imagine what that guy blusters on the phone when he's mad about something. And imagine if the FBI has access to those conversations, either through a confidential informant or a wiretap, FISA orders that went out. Imagine if he was caught up in it after they were granted. The idea that Donald Trump he's just not clever enough. If you're going to fuck with the FBI, you need to be really smart, at least as smart as they are. He isn't, and nor is anybody working for him. He's digging his own grave. Shovelful by shovelful, it just gets deeper and deeper, and as what led off the segment, we sit down to do show prep to talk about Nunez, and we find out Nunez isn't the headline. Sally Yates being blocked from testifying by the White House is the headline. This all has the feeling of something that just can't go on very much longer.
You talked to Putin last week. Do you respect Putin?
I do respect him.
Do you?
But
Why?
He's a leader of his country.
Putin's a killer.
A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent?
I don't know of any government leaders that are killers in America.
Well, if we had a relationship with Russia, wouldn't it be wonderful?
Let me ask you about some of the things you said about Vladimir Putin. You said, I will tell you, in terms of leadership, he's getting an A. And when referring to a comment that Putin made about you, I think he called you a brilliant leader, you said it's always a great honor to be so nicely complimented by a man so highly respected within his country and beyond.
Well, he does have an 82% approval rating.
He's also a guy who annexed Crimea, invaded Ukraine, supports Assad in Syria, supports Iran, is trying to undermine our influence in key regions of the world, and according to our intelligence community, probably is the main suspect for the hacking of the DNC computers.
Well, nobody knows that for a fact, but well, I think when he calls me brilliant, I'll take the compliment, okay? The fact that he calls me brilliant or whatever he calls me is going to have zero impact. If he says great things about me, I'm going to say great things about him. I've already said he is really very much of a leader. I mean, you can say, oh, isn't that a terrible thing? He called, I mean, the man has very strong control over a country. Now, it's a very different system, and I don't happen to like the system, but certainly in that system, he's been a leader.
So there's this guy, Alexei Navalny, you wanted to talk a little bit about for our second segment. Why is that?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first one is that I think it's good for us to remember from time to time here in America that there are places in the world which are not so fortunate, and one of those places happens to be the former Soviet Union, now known as the Russian Federation. Alexei Navalny is probably the primary opponent to Vladimir Putin left in Russia. Understand, being an opponent of Vladimir Putin in Russia is a very unhealthy business to be in. He has been leading a one-man wrecking crew against corruption in Russia, and he's been getting down and dirty to get the information that he needs, going so far as to basically buy a fleet of drones to fly around and surveil different properties that are owned by various oligarchs in Russia that appear to be empty. We're talking, multi-million dollar mansions, some of them in Moscow and around the country. He's been collecting information about that and about, their different activities, and basically how the Russian government is making a few people extraordinarily rich while the average Russian citizen is broke.
Yeah, that's never happened anywhere else that we would be familiar with.
Oh, no, heavens no. This week, Mr. Navalny, I'll read from a BBC article entitled Russia Jails Protest Leader Alexei Navalny for 15 Days. Just as I said, Mr. Navalny was among several hundred people who were detained in connection with rallies across the country. The court in Moscow earlier fined him the minimum of 20,000 rubles or $350 for organizing the banned protests. On Monday, the Kremlin accused the opposition of encouraging lawbreaking and provoking violence. Some young people were paid to attend, a Russian spokesman said. Right. Mr. Navalny later repeated accusations of corruption against Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev. The allegations were the main reason behind Sunday's protests, which drew thousands of demonstrators nationwide, including in St. Petersburg and other cities across Russia. So we have just seen in Russia, sort of running on a parallel track to our Russia investigation here, Vladimir Putin has a new set of problems in Russia, which really haven't been around for him since around the 2010-2011 time, the last time he was running for president. Subsequent to his previous election, Vladimir Putin has taken many steps to shut down protest across Russia because, like all autocrats and dictators, he can't handle criticism. The very presence of opposition to him is unthinkable. He has no room in his worldview for democracy, even if he goes through the motions of having one because he feels it's necessary to maintain power. What's interesting to me about this is that it's not just in Russia where protesters are being targeted.
In Kira Lerner's Think Progress piece titled Republicans Push Anti-Protest Laws, she talks about what Republicans have been doing as a result of protests against Trump and his policies and a variety of other things that have sprung up pretty much constantly since his election. In Minnesota, there was a bill passed recently by a Republican-controlled committee that would, quote, allow cities to sue protesters in order to collect money to pay police forces required at the demonstration, end quote. Now, I am not a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure that's a First Amendment violation because billing somebody for an activity does not make it free speech.
You're saying I have to pay a fine for peaceably assembling?
Yeah.
That's very strange to me, reading the First Amendment, how that was in any way what the Founding Fathers intended when they wrote that particular amendment.
Yeah, and it's not going to surprise you that already there are organizations who are like, wait a minute, that doesn't work. In Michigan, they're sort of going for a twofer by attacking both, quote, unions and protesters, end quote, by increasing fines against picketers. So people, again, expressing their position on the company they work for.
No dissent is allowed here. No public dissent is allowed.
So basically, obviously, you can apply that to anybody, really, that's got protest signs. It's obviously targeted union representation, but really anybody who's walking around with a placard conceivably could be targeted. The difference is who's getting billed for it. In this case, they're talking about billing the unions and stuff, as well as the union members. There are 4 other states that are considering anti-protest laws specifically against protesters who protest blocking traffic. Now, I personally have sort of issues with that simply because that strikes me as a good way for your protesters to get killed, especially when they're talking about laws in, North Dakota, Minnesota, Washington, and Iowa that would essentially allow you to run over a protester and not suffer consequences as a result. While I can appreciate the desire to want to do something like that, the fact remains that this is almost the equivalent of one of those shitty stand your ground bills where I just basically have clearance to fucking kill somebody and that's okay.
To me, the real problem here is the instinct to tamp down on protest, that it's the protest that's the problem. That's what we really need to handle here as Republicans. I mean, notice this is universally Republican. Okay, we're talking about this in the context of Russian protests, which subsequent to Vladimir Putin's election in 2010 or 2011, wherever it was, he started to try and shut down protest. This is something that goes back in our history as well. That was Richard Nixon's whole, basically his entire rationale for the drug war, the real one, not the public one about law and order. The real one was this becomes a convenient way to get rid of anti-war protesters in the active left.
You snag them with drugs and call it a day.
Yeah, particularly minorities and hippies. So this is something you really do need to watch very carefully because, I mean, yeah, it's 2017, but remember how Putin came to the power he has now was not a one-step process. He didn't just appear one day in Russia as an autocrat. He very slowly had to turn off the different avenues for dissent and opposition, whether they were within the government or if it was just in civil demonstration, because autocrats can't handle dissent. So they have to somehow figure out a way to do away with it. And having Alexei Navalny arrested for 15 days, having an 8-year-old girl detained for having a sign on her fucking bike, that's what Vladimir Putin does. And that's the guy Trump is potentially in bed with.
It's becoming his role model. I mean, let's be honest. You're talking about a guy who has, in the case of Russia and Putin, a guy who has virtually unlimited power, who basically can make all the fucking money he wants, who is essentially a mob boss, who can quell dissent, even to the point of killing people, which Putin has been accused of on numerous occasions, journalists, other dissidents.
Oh, yeah. No, he's a stone-cold killer, that's for sure.
And it sounds hyperbolic to say that this is what we're looking at here in the U.S. But if somebody doesn't step on Trump, that's what we're looking at. Part of the problem is it's not even just Trump. Trump, at the end of the day, I think is an idiot. I don't think he really knows what he's doing. There's a reason that he basically has elevated his son-in-law to an office that basically makes him the de facto president because he doesn't want to deal with it.
Yeah, even though Kushner's not in any way qualified for this job. He doesn't have the experience to tie his shoelaces at government at this level. It's just sad.
What's actually more sad is that he seems to be one of the most qualified people he has, and he's still not qualified to do this. My point ultimately is that it's also not just about ousting Trump. There is a level of corruption that exists right now in our government, and it's primarily Republican. It's not all the Republicans. I'm not going to tar all the Republicans with that brush, but it is primarily Republican, and it's behaving in the same way, as if they're literally taking notes from Putin, or by extension, an author we mentioned several episodes ago, Hannah Arendt, talking about authoritarianism. Because the first thing you have to do is shut up the people who can tell you no.
Even the people who don't especially matter. Because in this case, Alexei Navalny, just to give you a little context, he really has no chance of winning the Russian election that's upcoming. He's announced he's going to be running, but the problem is that he's already been caught up in trumped-up charges by the Russian courts, surely handed down from Vladimir Putin, to disqualify him from running. That's step one. Then last week, or 2 weeks ago, Navalny was over in Siberia doing an event, and somebody pretended to shake his hand and splashed a green chemical in his face that bleached his face and hands green for about a week. This is the kind of down and dirty shit that they do in Russia, and this is the kind of guy that Trump thinks is a smart, great leader. That is his opinion of this behavior, and the Republican Party, which is ostensibly working for Trump right now, seems to have very similar feelings on protests, and the exact same lines about how, they're paid. They're just paid to be there. Right, because nobody could just hate Vladimir Putin because he's a corrupt piece of shit. That's not sufficient to bring anybody to the streets. But I just wanted to bring attention to what's going on in Russia, because this show, we do occasionally want to dip our toe into the international waters, and to remind American citizens that as dark as things sometimes seem here with our own, boy King Joffrey here, there are places in the world where it's considerably worse, and it's nice to stop and take these places as an example of what we don't want to happen here. And when Wayne and I and others, frankly, in the media begin to notice the slow creep towards this kind of, it's not a totalitarian system like, Hitler or Stalin, but it's slowly turning the laws to favor the rich and powerful and to quash dissent in whatever way that they can or that they deem necessary, even if it flies directly in the face of the Constitution, particularly the spirit of it.
The very nature of shifting power from the people to a handful at the top with money absolutely goes against the spirit, if not the letter of the Constitution. I mean, let's be honest. There are a variety of reasons for the American Revolution. They're the ones you get in school, and there's the other stuff. But at the end of the day, what you had is a colonial organization that didn't want to belong to the empire anymore. You can worry about their motivations, whatever. The end result was, we don't want a king.
Yeah.
We want a leader who's going to listen to the people. Well, guess what? We don't have a leader who's going to listen to the people. We have a king. and we have to do something about that.
That is the spirit of the revolution. I mean, yes, a lot of the framers were wealthy guys who obviously had some financial stake in what happened afterward when the document was, signed and ratified. But the initial sort of thrust for the revolution was very much against hereditary succession. The whole idea of kingship is what was on trial during the time. It was more than money. If you've read Thomas Paine's Common Sense, half the damn pamphlet is all about how ridiculous the idea that some kid shot out by some king should automatically become the ruler of an entire people, invested with powers that are unchecked and unquestioned.
And yet that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that Trump apparently thinks is a good idea, a similar situation where rich people keep all the money, have all the power, shut down all of the dissent that they can. Trump, he admires people that do this and appears to wish it for himself, which is disgusting enough to me as an American, even if he can't possibly achieve it.
Well, and let's go back to the whole hereditary monarchy thing that you were just talking about. The Kennedys got a bunch of shit about that type of thing back when JFK was president.
Kennedys still have to get elected.
Right, and that's part of the difference. Trump has managed to get elected, but he has surrounded himself by unelected people related to him, and they all stand to profit from his position.
And they are responsible for his financial holdings, supposedly, while he's in office. There is no line for Trump between his personal wealth and business and the country. I think he sees the job as one unified thing, which is why he didn't divest, which is why he won't give his tax returns. His position as president is merely an instrument to further his personal profit. That is a primary, if not the primary reason he is president.
Which then brings us back to his role model, Putin.
Yeah.
Who has become essentially that.
A lot of people who know money say that Vladimir Putin is the wealthiest person in the world. How did he get that way? Behaving like a gangster in Russia.
Despite the Republican attempts to suppress the people's voice, as always, what we need to do is organize, mobilize, protest, vote.